having me here. Next, we're going to hear from Nitza Vera, Community Liaison, Banana Kelly Improvement Association.
Good evening. My name is Nitza Vera, and I came to speak on my personal experience as a lifelong resident of the Bronx and community liaison at Banana Kelly Community Improvement Association. My father was my life. He was a man convicted to his traditions and moral principles. He was my role model and mentor. He was a good provider and was very helpful to my mother with all of us. Thank you. While he was with us. I remember him and I'm reminded of why I'm so determined. This is why I have mixed emotions of what I'm about to say. Please bear in mind that as I speak, I will always love my father. When I was about 4 or 5, I remember my father being at home more often than usual, so I assumed he had lost his job. As time passed, the few arguments about money matters escalated into shoves and eventually into severe hitting. First at my mother, then to all of us. I cannot put into words the fear and uncertainty this brought upon me as a child. I couldn't understand my father beat my mother since he was so affectionate to her. But I just stood over my mother while she lied on the floor, crying, covering her bruised face to block the blows. But all I could feel was this overwhelming paralysis, complicated by guilt for not being able to save her as she cried, with a sense of helplessness and a sense of sorrow. I was faced with the choice.
Take your time.
I was faced with the choice of saving my mother and getting beaten up for it. But I just froze. That's such a hard choice for a 5-year-old to make. Overwhelmed by guilt, which I have yet to come to terms with. Because I could have done something, but I didn't. I became silent, withdrawn, and protective of my brothers and sisters, and was always alert for my mother. I tried desperately not to make him upset or angry. Where were the neighbors who heard my mother's screams at night, and as we yelled trying to protect her? Where were the authorities? And where were my relatives? I left home at 17 years old to escape the abuse, not because I was a pregnant teen. I had met a man that at the time was just a friend, and he later became the father of my 4 children. When he became abusive, I rationalized thinking that I must be the cause, because if he was abusing me as well, I had to be provoking this anger, because they didn't know each other. He didn't only beat me, he also dehumanized me by putting me down, making me feel the worthless thing on earth. I couldn't leave because I saw how my mother struggled on welfare. I didn't want to go through that. My abuser earned $1,000 a week. I believe we all play a part in this because whenever I called the police to press charges and find some help, they would patronize me and tell me to talk it over tomorrow after a good night's sleep. Whenever my children were upset or challenged my authority, neighbors and family members would encourage and pressure me to beat them because that's what they needed to put them back in line. I kept trying to explain to these people that through understanding and listening was a better way. When I went to people that I had respect for, they would tell me to stick to my husband and that no matter what, he is the father of my children and you're expected to be strong and hang in there. I once tried hitting my daughter, but when I saw the terrified expression on her face, I began to get flashbacks and I couldn't deal with it. It lasted for weeks. so I vowed never to hit my children again. One of my neighbors was beaten last year by her boyfriend in the presence of my 12-year-old daughter. My daughter called 911 and the officers who responded came up with the boyfriend. My daughter tried to explain to the officers but was told to be quiet. She then called me at work because the officers had told my neighbor that next time she calls, they're gonna call the welfare worker and say that she has a man at home. I was outraged, to say the least. This sent the message to my daughter that she will have to be subject herself to this kind of abuse, because even those who are put there to protect us fail to do so. Another neighbor of mine is putting up with it. Is putting up with the abuse because when she called the police, even though they saw she was carrying an infant in her arms and her 5-year-old daughter was terrified, the officers didn't even get out of the patrol car, even though she had wounds on her face. So then when she got upstairs, she really learned her lesson, because now her boyfriend beat her up for calling the police. I feel compelled to protect these women, and it has gotten me in situations with their spouses, and my children know all too well that my home is a safe haven for these women. But if I just ignore it, I'll be denying my own pain, and in a sense, I feel like I'm saving my mother for all those times that I couldn't save her. When I work, where I work, I call Section 8 to inquire about getting a family an emergency transfer because there's domestic violence. One of the liaisons asked me if it's her boyfriend or her husband who beats her, and I answer by saying that I don't think that has any bearing. And then he corrects me by saying that if it's her boyfriend, it's not considered domestic violence. If this woman is on welfare, she will be charged with child abuse because the abuser does not have custody of the children. Therefore, the mother is put on trial, because the mother having custody means that even if she's beaten up, it is considered neglect, abuse, or endangering the child's well-being. So it's the mother who is put on trial. She's the one that has to get parenting skill classes or whatever the agency claims she needs to take before her case is closed. I'll give you one example and then I'll finish. Last year, the father of my 4 children yelled at my 14-year-old daughter, although he doesn't live at home. He threatened with beating her up if she disrespects him or me. So then my daughter told the school officials. And then I was taken to court, and I was on probation for 1 whole year, even though he doesn't live with me. So last September, my probation period was over. And I almost lost my grandchildren and my other children as well. I hope that we all start working together so that my daughters, granddaughters will have a better chance. I hope my story will help to influence those who have the power to change policy and create laws to protect us all. Thank you for listening.
Nitza, let me thank you very much for sharing. All right, go ahead, kiss him first. For sharing your story with us. There doesn't seem to be an adequate statement to make after that, except that you are a woman of incredible strength. And I'm sure that you have 4 strong children, too, who have changed the pattern that you had to live through. And that takes an amazing amount of courage, and one for which we all have tremendous admiration. I also am certain that your mother understands and probably lives with the same guilt that you do. For your suggestions, we will certainly work. I know the police department has made some significant changes since you had to go through that, and there are recent changes in the police department, but we do need to be reminded every day that attitudes have to change for people who are on that front line, who get called initially to intervene, and that's where the stop has got to be made, so that you don't have to face the repercussions, which are so real and that you talked about. Again, I want to thank you. We will do all we can to maybe take back to City Hall some changes in the Section 8 analysis, which we've heard time and time again that unfortunately the 2 sets of rules that function for those people who are battered by their legal spouse as opposed to someone else in their life, there's a very different societal reaction in terms of the safety net that we have in place now, and you've illustrated that for us, and I can only just say thank you very much, and you are an inspiration of strength and courage to all of us, and if you can beat that system and beat what you've gone through, despite all the obstacles that society's put in your way, we certainly can come together to try and find some
better solutions and hope for the future, so thank you very much.
Nitza, I just wanted to say that I certainly commend you for being that survivor. And all of us, I'm sure, can relate to when you said a neighbor would come up, somebody would say, stick with him. He is the father of your children. Take those beatings. What's important about today, Nitza, is that women are realizing that you don't have to stay there and be abused. It's a start, but we are coming along slowly but surely, and that, as Congresswoman Molinari said, attitudes have to change with everybody, including PD. It's going to take a little while, but you're a strong survivor. You're the example for your daughter, and that's very important. So I commend you for sharing, and I'm sure all of us were touched and could relate to a lot of what you said. Gracias.
Anybody else on the panel? Well, thank you, Nitza. If you ever want to run for public office, let us know.
Social service areas. The South Bronx CAB office has several programs, including a domestic violence program, which has been funded by the State Department of Social Services over the past 2 years. We initially applied for funding in this area because of our work with immigrants and relocated families. In both populations, we were seeing problems with domestic violence and decided that the addition of a non-residential program, which would include counseling, advocacy, and community education, would allow the agency to assist with this great problem. The CAB Domestic Violence Program provides services in 3 main areas: community education, hotline services, and domestic violence counseling and advocacy. The community education component is vital to our program because it allows us to gauge the extent of domestic violence among certain groups and to advertise our program beyond the familiar outreach tactics of flyer distribution and mailings. Our community outreach education component is in the form of presentations, group discussions, and distribution of information. We have presented in local schools for parent associations, community agencies, tenant associations, and alternative to incarceration programs. The success of our presentations can be seen in the number of phone calls and appointments for clients immediately following the events. Often we receive calls from people immediately following the presentations who are looking for services. There are some presentations where emotions run high. Generally, we present on a number of topics and show a video. At one presentation to a tenant group earlier this year, a man in the audience of about 10 people suddenly became very agitated and very argumentative towards the presenter. His actions became so disruptive that the presenter decided to cancel the session for fear that it would become so disruptive, for fear that it would get out of hand. The very next day, 2 women who had been at the presentation called the office to inform us that they wished to make an appointment with the domestic violence counselor. We were informed that the disruptive man was most probably an abuser who could be heard frequently yelling at his wife. Community education is important because it allows people to hear about all forms of abuse. When you mention domestic violence, not everyone knows exactly what it means. People think in terms of physical abuse, however, there are other forms of abuse as well. people can be victims of physical, emotional, and verbal abuse. We have had cases where women are not physically harmed but subjected to a barrage of verbal assaults over time. This type of abuse can be very